Misgendering, white privilege, and transphobia. To quote Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, today we run train on the progressive agenda. Then, what should be done about Steve King? We analyze congressional Democrat hypocrisy. Finally, the left is furious that Karen Pence is starting to work at a Christian school. Heaven forfend! I'm Michael Knowles, and this is The Michael Knowles Show. All right, before we run train on today's program, we got to run train on some new sponsors. I want to thank a wonderful new sponsor, Spear. Spear is this terrific product. I've now just started using it because I didn't know it existed. You have got to try it too. Most people hate writing, especially me. It took me 27 years to not write a book, though it did become a bestseller. Most people hate writing because word processors are not designed to help you organize your thoughts. They're word processors, but they're not thought processors. If you've ever had writer's block, if you've ever stared at that blank screen, if you want to write podcasts or blogs or diary entries or books or whatever you want to do, Spear is a thought processor that helps you organize your ideas as you write. You can write your thoughts in any order you want. You can move your thoughts around. You can make changes without the fear of losing your original idea. You will be able to articulate your ideas faster and easier because it's the most flexible tool for writing and thinking. Most people are not in the know. They just use a word processor. This is so much better. The possibilities are infinite. It is like working with Legos. This week, my listeners can get Spear for just $3.75 per month for the first year of service. That's a 25% discount off the regular price. Sign up today by going to Spear, S-P-E-A-R-E, you know, like the writer, Shakespeare, spear.com/Knowles, Knowles. That is Spear with an E, like Shakespeare. Speaking of people who are not great with their words, speaking of people who could probably use a thought processor herself, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, our gaffe-prone congresswoman from upstate New York, she's really done it again. This was probably the funniest one she's done yet. She was doing an interview with a newspaper, and she said, quote, "I'm 6 days into the term, and you already used all your ammo." She's referring to the right wing. "So enjoy being exhausted for the next 2 years while we run train on the progressive agenda." So for those of you who don't know what running train means, running train is when a man and a man and a man and a man and another man and like 10 or 20 other men and a woman don't love each other very much, but they all get together and they do that thing that men and women do when they do love each other. That is running train. It's a very graphic sexual act. and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez apparently thought, running train means succeed in implementing. I don't know. Is that what she thought it meant? You can check out Urban Dictionary if you don't believe me, although I do warn you about putting that phrase into your Google searches. You will get some results that probably you don't want to see. This is just a lovely gaffe. It doesn't have much to do with her policy proposals. It's not a major news story. The reason, though, that I really like this one is this is what happens when a nice girl from the suburbs all of a sudden at the age of 28 decides to pretend that she's Jenny from the block. This is what happens, is you have this girl who grew up in this lovely little place where the does are jumping and the little rabbits are there, you know, and it's so lovely. You go to the community festivals, whatever, and she's pretending now that she's from the Bronx, that she's from the South Bronx, the mean streets of the boroughs, and she's not. And so she's trying to use slang terms, you know, vulgar expressions as though she grew up in those areas, and she didn't, and she doesn't know what they mean, and it's really funny. This is an authenticity issue for her. She has a lot of things going for her in the media. She's likable, she's bubbly, she's relatively attractive, she is young. So she's got all those things going for her. This authenticity thing, though, is an issue because pretty soon you're going to see her like misquoting Biggie Smalls or something. It doesn't, she has all of the trappings of of people who are from really privileged areas. She's a socialist, she's kind of ditzy, she has a very expensive education, even though it didn't teach her very much, and she's pretending to use urban language or vulgar language in a way that doesn't quite work. Donald Trump, knock him if you will, the guy really did grow up in Queens, and he really talks like he grew up in Queens. And I bet he knows what that phrase means. Moving on to a more important story, but equally frivolous. On CNN, a CNN analyst, Areva Martin, went on a radio show with conservative radio host David Webb, whereupon she accused David Webb of white privilege. There's only one problem. David Webb is a black guy. Here's the exchange.
I never considered my color the issue. I considered my qualifications the issue.
Well, David, that's a whole nother long conversation about white privilege and things that you have the privilege of doing that people of color don't have the privilege of.
How do I have the privilege of white privilege?
David, by virtue of being a white male, you have white privilege. This whole long conversation, I don't have time to get into it.
Areva, I hate to break it to you, but you should have been better prepped. I'm black.
Okay, then I stand.
See, you went to white privilege. This is the falsehood in this.
Do you hear what she started to say? Areva, I hate to break it to you, I'm black. And then there's that moment of silence. She says, well, okay, I can either apologize for just being a race-hustling, ignorant, cynical politician, or I stand by my, and then he starts to cut her off there. This is obviously hilarious. One of the best media moments of the year, in a year full of them already. But this is the problem with the left right now, is I identify this in left-wing rhetoric when you're debating a leftist, when they go on television, when they're in the halls of Congress or wherever. They use so many logical fallacies, and specifically they use these ad hominem fallacies. They can't argue with the points that you're making, so they just start attacking the person who's making them. And I've just identified a few of these. You've got to look out for it, because whenever the left throws one of these at you, you know that you've won the argument. The first one, you saw it right here, is privilege. Privilege. I mean, the way this woman did it from CNN, she went in, she felt, I don't need to look up who this guy is, I don't need to look up what this guy thinks. All I'm going to do, I'm assuming he's a conservative, I'm going to assume he's a white guy, and I'm going to assume that he has all of this privilege. And she didn't take a second to even second guess this notion. And then he tells her, I'm a black guy. You've done no homework. You know nothing about me. But imagine if that host were a white guy. What could he have said? It would have convinced half the country, at least, if he had been a white guy. And she'd say, but you have white privilege. And even though she can't explain how that manifests, it still would be convincing. This privilege thing is obviously an ad hominem attack, and it means that arguments are not as important as the arguer. You should judge a person's argument based on the color of his skin or who he is or where he is, rather than the quality and content of his arguments. The thing that's funny about privilege, though, is that no privilege disqualifies anyone from conversation. What privilege would disqualify anyone from debate? In fact, privilege should overqualify you for debate, shouldn't it? If I've had the privilege of maybe a few extra brain cells than the average Joe on the street, maybe if I'm lucky. I've had the privilege of a good education from kindergarten all the way through college. Those are privileges which have actually prepared me better to think about certain things and to discuss certain ideas. That's a privilege of education. That's a good thing. That's not a disqualification from debate. The left, as we talk about a lot, gets reality backwards. So what is a privilege? A privilege is a special advantage for one person or one group. That's a privilege. It's an advantage. What the left has turned privilege into is a disadvantage. They're saying that if you are privileged, you are now at a disadvantage. You can't give your opinion. Your opinion is invalid. Your political work is invalid, and your vision is invalid. As the left always does, it's perverting the thing into the opposite of the thing, the advantage into the disadvantage. And by the way, everybody has different privileges. I'm not suggesting that nobody has privilege. I'm not suggesting that everybody has privilege. If that were true, there'd be no such thing as privilege. But some people have different privileges. Some people are more athletically gifted. I'm not an Adonis of a man. They have more of a natural privilege in that regard than I do. Some people are more mathematically gifted. They have a privilege in that way. Some people are financially gifted. They're born into money. I met a lot of people in my life who were born into money. I was not, but many people are. That's a privilege. That's an advantage. I'm not going to demonize that. I'm not going to vilify that. If you're born into money, good for you. I hope that helps your life and you get a good education and you can enjoy all the pleasures in the world. Some people have other privileges. There is a privilege to not being born into money. And the privilege of that is you learn a little bit how the world really works. You can see more how most people are living. You can go through a little bit of suffering. Maybe that suffering helps to form your character, makes you stronger, makes you more courageous. Maybe it makes you more daring or more ambitious. I've seen plenty of people born into wealth who become wastrels, and I've seen plenty of people who had nothing growing up really make something of themselves, succeed at the highest level. Privilege is really hard to quantify in some hierarchy of victimhood, which is exactly what the left wants to do. We all, to varying degrees, can have a privilege of reason. Some people are unreasonable. And some people have a very low privilege of reason, but if one has the privilege of reason, then you shouldn't say you have privilege so you're not allowed to speak. You should say you have that wonderful privilege of reason. Please use it. Please enlighten me and describe the world as you see it. The next one, which is very closely related, is mansplaining. This is also obviously an ad hominem attack. This is also an attack that says that the arguer is more important than the argument. What mansplaining does, the funniest thing about that stupid word is it's like manspreading. Manspreading is when men sit, but if they're sitting, these are their two legs. Instead of sitting with their legs crossed over one another really tight, they're sitting so that their legs are a little bit apart. The reason they do this, in case you didn't take high school biology class, is that they're making way for certain anatomical privileges that only men have and women do not have. So there's a reason for this. It's a commonplace occurrence. Half of the population does it. The same thing with mansplaining. Mansplaining is when a man explains something. Now, we all explain things to each other. The reason we do it is because we're human beings with the faculties of speech. So we use speech, and speech is politics. Speech is civilization. We speak to one another. We don't grunt like the brutes most of the time, so we just talk and we persuade each other and we try to get each other to come around to our points of view, and we learn and we instruct and we're curious and we ask questions. So that's just men explaining. What the term mansplaining does is it portrays as bizarre or strange when half of the population does the most basic human thing. That's supposed to be really weird and strange. So you're talking to a girl who's not girl understanding, to use Andrew Klavan's term, and she says, "You're mansplaining." You say, "Damn right I'm mansplaining. What else can I do? I can't womansplain. I don't identify as a woman. I'm sorry about that." The way that they use this, of course, on the left, is that it's a way of shutting up half of the population. All it means, these phrases, check your privilege, these phrases, mansplaining, it just means shut up. And the reason that they go after men is men are more likely to be conservative. Obviously, there are a lot of conservative women. There are a lot of very sad left-wing men. But generally, men trend more conservative, and certainly in America. So they use it to shut up half the population. The other one they use is the phrases safety and comfort and safe space and that sort of thing. This is a little bit different, but it's playing on the same idea. It still means shut up. It's still a logical fallacy or a discursive fallacy. But what it does is when they say, your ideas are making me feel unsafe. The things you're saying are making me feel threatened. They're making me, I'm not in a place of comfort anymore. I hear this all the time when I go around to colleges. We speak at these colleges, we'll get protested, there have been student groups that have tried to shut us down with the administration, and they'll say the things that Michael is saying are unsafe. They threaten us. But of course, what do they threaten? What am I talking? I'm talking about Edmund Burke, and that threatens them or something? Of course not. What they do is they conflate speech with violence. And so when the left, if you're having a conversation, when they accuse you of this, of threatening them, of making them feel unsafe, of making them not feel comfortable, what they are essentially doing is accusing your speaking as physically assaulting and battering them. They're saying your words are punches, your words are hurting me. It says, when you couple that with mansplaining, it's that if you're speaking to a woman and you're disagreeing with her, you're the equivalent of a wife beater, because you're threatening her, you're making her unsafe, you're making her uncomfortable. That's the third one. And then just one other, this is a broader observation in the culture, but it's being led by the left, it's being weaponized by the left, is mental illness. Mental illness is all the rage these days. It's all anybody can talk about. It's used as an excuse to excuse terrible behavior, and it comes from a real place. Young people are much more likely today to be anxious, to be stressed, to be depressed. An ASU study found that a quarter of college students are suffering PTSD because Donald Trump won the presidential election in 2016. Their rates of suicide are increasing, and especially among young people. Teen suicide is up 70% now, and rates of being prescribed these depression drugs, all of these SSRIs and those sorts of things, are way up. They're also through the roof. So everybody thinks they have a mental problem. Everybody is on depression drugs. Constantly talking about mental illness, what it's really about is not the people, the few people who really could benefit from taking drugs all the time. Not the few people who have worked through their psychological problems and actually have a physical problem that requires medication. What this is about is relativism. This is what it's all about. You see it all the time on Everyday Feminism, on all the really far left-wing websites and podcasts. They all say that they have mental illness, and we need to talk about mental illness, and we need to describe mental illness. And the reason that they talk about mental illness all the time is because it brings to the fore different visions of reality, but not different visions of reality using right reasons, specifically different insane visions of reality, to say, well, this person views things this way, and their mind is inaccessible to you. Because when people are sane, when they have mental health, we can use our faculties of reason to communicate with one another, and we're speaking about an objective outside world. But if everybody's a little crazy, if everybody's a little kooky, nobody's really accessing the objective world in the right way, then we don't have access to objectivity anymore. We don't have access to reality anymore. We're back in the tyranny of subjectivism. We're back in the tyranny of our feelings. We can't talk about facts, as we say here on the Daily Wire a lot. We have to talk about feelings, and nobody can be wrong and nobody can be right. Every opinion is valid. Everything is your truth or my truth or this truth or that truth. This is why the left is focused on that. This is why, not necessarily on CNN or the Washington Post, but when you go to the really more fringy, more radical left-wing websites, blogs, podcasts, that's what they're focusing on. It is not out of compassion for people who have psychological problems. Very often, by the way, people who have psychological problems have philosophical problems. The issue isn't the synapses in their brain. The issue is how they're living their lives and how they view the world and how they view themselves in relation not only to their creator, but the rest of the creation. And so they talk about that not out of compassion for those people, but they do it as a way of advancing their base agenda, which they've had now for at least 50 or 60 years, which is radical subjectivism. Speaking of mental illness and speaking of radical subjectivism, this video first cropped up on the internet, I guess really between Christmas and New Year's, but because everybody was shut down in the commentary, we haven't gotten a chance to talk about it. We have to talk about it. This is a transgender guy, so a guy who dresses as a woman, goes into some store and starts losing his mind, losing what's left of his mind, because he thinks that somebody has referred to him, a 6'2" giant man, as a man. Take a look.
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am.
I can call the police if you'd like me to. You need to settle down.
You need to settle down and mind your business, okay?
Both of you guys?
Ma'am, once again, ma'am.
I said both of you.
No, you said sir. Once again, it's ma'am.
I actually said both of you guys. It was in general.
Right beforehand, you f***ing said sir.
Sir? Okay.
Mother, take it outside. If you want to call me sir again, I will show you a f***ing sir.
I apologize.
Mother.
I apologize now.
I need your corporate number because I'm going to call them and talk about how it's misgendered several times in this store.
I apologize for that.
I need your corporate number now.
I can get it before you feel like it's not a problem.
Get it for me now.
I can do that. I'm going to ask you to calm down and stop cussing.
Give me your
Stop
corporate
hitting
number.
destroying property.
Well, I'm going to ask you for the 5th time to stop calling me a man, because quite clearly I am not.
And I apologize. I'm sorry for that, ma'am. I will get you that number. Is that okay?
Yes,
I'm
get it
just
for me
asking you-
now.
I'm asking you to stop
Get it
cussing.
for me now.
Yes, the giant person screaming, shouting, 6 foot tall, knocking over products, screaming that he's going to go take the kid outside and beat him up. That person is clearly not a man. Giant Adam's apple, I assume down below, well, I don't know, maybe let's not assume. That guy is a man, obviously. He has a psychological condition, one imagines. He also has a philosophical condition, which is being indulged and encouraged by our mentally insane society, which is that he thinks that a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man just because he puts on lipstick. If you put on lipstick, then you're a woman. But of course, that's not what makes a woman. Growing your hair a little longer is not what makes a woman. I know plenty of scraggly-haired hippies out in LA who have long hair and don't think that they're women. This thing that we've just watched here, the kid, I guess he said, okay, guys, calm down. And I think he was using guys in a gender-neutral way. And this guy, who thinks he's a woman, loses his mind, starts screaming. And this kid backs down and says, I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry, lady, it's okay, you know. And the reason I bring this up is, look, this guy's obviously lost his mind, and what's unfortunate for him is that the society is even crazier than he is, so they're going to encourage him and let him continue down this path of self-degradation. But the reason I bring this up too is because it shows where the rubber meets the road between various schools of conservative thought. If you look at this guy is a man who wants to be a woman. And if you find your political views are rooted really in individualism, self-definition, I can do whatever I want to do, absolutely at any time, I own my life, I can define myself however I want to define myself, then he actually makes a pretty good case for always making other people call him ma'am or call him a woman. The line from individualism to collectivism is actually pretty direct. I think sometimes among conservative circles, we want to pretend that the big dichotomy in the world is between between individualism and collectivism. One prioritizes the individual as the absolute most important thing in society. The other prioritizes the collective, all of those individuals together. They're two sides of the same coin. There's a direct line between them. If you say that the individual is the most important atomic fundamental building block of society, that in a state of nature, individuals are just floating around in free space without any ties of loyalty to family or friends or tribe or country or whatever, if you believe that, then the government's job is first and foremost to protect individualism. That's the purpose of it, is to protect individual liberty to the point of individualism. But if the government is there to protect individualism and our corporate society decides that they're not going to recognize somebody's own self-definition, then that corporation is infringing on individualism. If this guy says, I am a woman, and corporate America or the government, state government or whatever, says that he's not a woman, they're not going to call him a woman, they're infringing on his radical individual self-definition. And so it makes perfect sense for there to be regulations over how businesses can treat people, how schools have to refer to people, how to use pronouns. They use the phrase misgendered. Obviously, the only person who has misgendered this guy is himself. He is misgendering himself because he thinks that he's a woman. But they've inverted this phrase, and it does make sense. There is a reason why, in the thinking of all of those early, what we would call classical liberals or even libertarians, if you look at Thomas Paine, for instance, the guy who wrote Common Sense, Force in the American Revolution, or the writings of Thomas Jefferson, or people who come after that throughout the Enlightenment and onward, you can see a line from exalting the individual as the be-all and end-all atomic unit of society and protecting the collective of individuals. The actual difference here, the actual different worldviews, is between liberalism or modernism or individualism or collectivism or everything that goes along with it, and the conservative worldview, which says there is a reality. You cannot self-define You cannot by yourself define reality. There is an objective reality. You are a man. No law passed by any government will change the fact that that guy's a man. No surgery that is cosmetic and alters his cheekbones or his Adam's apple will make that guy not a man. No corporate code of conduct will make that guy not a man. No market, no free market, which is now getting all of these corporations to start playing into the social justice warrior handbook. We saw this with Gillette. We've seen this with Nike. We've seen corporate America leading the way on liberalism and leftism. No free market is going to change the fact that this guy is a guy. And it's where we have to appeal to something deeper, more profound, more transcendent rather, than the individual or the free market or certain documents, the Constitution or state constitutions or laws or whatever. We have to appeal to something which is transcendent, which is the natural law and the natural lawmaker and the natural lawgiver and the institutions and the traditions that have transported these metaphysical realities into our modern age. That is what we've got to talk about. The question is not about rights. It's not about the rights of the guy who thinks he's a woman. It's not about the rights of the guy working at the store. It's not about the rights of a democratic republic to pass laws changing the definition of men and women. It's about reality, and we have to recognize reality. We have to prioritize reality above any of the various ideologies, left-wing or right-wing, that everybody is so crazy about today. We've got to talk about Steve King. We haven't had time. We've run out of time the last few days. We got to talk about him. We've got to talk about those cackling hens on The View, to quote Norm Macdonald. We've got to talk about different kinds of bigotry, not just racial bigotry, but also religious bigotry. And if we have time, we'll talk about why we can't run our own countries after the British Parliament runs train on Theresa May's Brexit deal. But first, go to dailywire.com. If you're already there, thank you very much. You help keep the lights on. You keep covfefe in my cup. If you're not, it's $10 a month, $100 for an annual membership. But Michael, what do I get? What do you get? What don't you get? You get me. You get the Andrew Klavan Show, Ben Shapiro Show, Matt Walsh Show. You get to ask questions backstage. You get to ask questions in the mailbag. Get them in. That'll be tomorrow. You get to ask questions. You get to watch all the backstage that are coming up now. You get to see Another Kingdom. We've got 2 seasons up there now, and none of that matters because you get this. You get the Leftist Tears Tumbler. This is very important because, now when you take airplanes, when you get on modes of transportation, you're not always allowed to take water bottles or certain little bottles of perfume or whatever. But when you are running train on the progressive agenda, you are allowed, the FDA, the FAA, the the FAT, the FTA, I don't know. They allow you to bring on the Leftist Tears Tumbler. That's the only way to do it, because when you're running train on the progressive agenda, there are going to be a lot of leftist tears, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was describing today. You're going to want this. It is the only safe way to dispose of those leftist tears, to hold them, and then obviously dispose of them down your gullet. Go to dailywire.com. We'll be right back with Steve King.